on both our Facebook page, and we recently started having a YouTube page as well, where we've started posting some of the videos from our previous live sessions. So just to let everyone know that we will be recording this, and it's on all these different platforms. So if you have some issue with that, just be aware. So you have to like jump off or something if you don't want to be recorded. But I thought I would just be transparent about that. Okay, I think we're streaming. So thanks for joining us here. I'm just going to refresh my screens here.
I see, Glenn.
Monitor. And I promised to do a better job of answering people's questions online as well, because I realized I did a very poor job of that last time around. And because we were streaming on Facebook, and then there was like one person that posted some questions, and unfortunately did not see them until afterwards. So I've got my screens set up right here. So I'm going to try to monitor this live. So we'll see how well this goes. Oh, actually, I need to make sure I mute myself here so everyone doesn't hear me. Okay, well, thanks for joining us. And my name is Charles Gerina, and I'm the lead organizer for Drive Electric RVA. We promote electric vehicles in the Metro Richmond area as a fun and practical transportation alternative that also helps combat climate change and reduce air pollution. So I appreciate you all joining us today. We're broadcasting via Zoom, as well as to all these other different platforms, in an effort to try to connect with more electric vehicle owners and enthusiasts. It's been great learning about different types of EVs and about the technology. We've learned about the Kona and about the Niro and the Nissan Leaf and the Model 3, and also an EV conversion. So we've lots of varieties of different kinds of electric vehicles. If you've been joining us for these sessions we've been having every Saturday. And I think going forward, we're going to diversify the content a little bit because I'm honestly not sure how long we're going to have to do things virtually this way, because what we do usually is actually have a lot, in-person events where we bring electric vehicles to farmers markets and other kinds of public places. So people get a chance to see the technology up close and talk to people and have those one-on-one interactions. So this is sort of a technological substitute, if you will. So we'll try to keep this going as long as we can every Saturday at 2 o'clock. But because the fact is that the negative impacts of climate change and air pollution are not going away, even though there are a lot of gas cars that are off the road because of the pandemic. So it's an imperative to accelerate the electrification of transportation. So a few housekeeping notes. So if you wouldn't mind muting yourself if you're not already. Also, feel free, there's a chat function on Zoom. So if you're joining us on Zoom, feel free to type in the chat. If you just have a thought in mind, we will save the questions to the end. But then I'll look through the chat and then pull questions from there, or you can certainly wait until the end and talk at that point as well. And I'll also, again, try to do my best to monitor Facebook and YouTube, and if any questions come up there, I'll try to address those as well at the end. So I'll turn things over to Tim Parker. He's an electrical engineer with Kimley Horn. He will talk about the challenges of siting and designing charging stations. And so one of the charging stations that the company has been involved with, and he can speak more about this, is I learned this new term recently, juice bar. So so basically, if you have more than a couple of charging stations in one place, it's called a juice bar. So there's one of these actually installed by Electrify America at a Walmart on Brook Road here in Richmond. I actually went there last Sunday just to check it out, because I've never actually been to that part of that Walmart before. And so Kimley Horn played a role in having those charging stations installed. And so Tim will talk a little bit more about that and about sort of the state of EV charging infrastructure in Virginia. So I'll go ahead and turn things over to Tim.
Hey, thanks, Charles. Yeah, as you said, I'm electrical engineer for Kimley Horn. I work on Electrify America projects, as well as some other Volta and EVgo projects. I'm not an EV car owner, so some of the things that I know will be very different than what you all know, probably, because you probably know more about the specifics of the vehicle, and I deal very much with the infrastructure of getting these vehicles charged. Very interested in getting an EV one day, though. So yeah, just a little bit of background on me. Graduated from VCU here. I did some building infrastructure engineering for a while, and then I moved over to Kimley Horn, which is more of a civil engineering company. And they have very few electrical engineers. And then we started working with these EV chargers, and so naturally they had to bring some electrical expertise into it. I'm just going to kind of talk about somewhat specifically about Electrify America, but a lot of this will just kind of be about getting these charging sites, specifically these big ones, up and running, and how that kind of happens. Because I know you all probably want to see more of these, and it sometimes isn't, when it makes sense to do it, it sometimes isn't the easiest to get done because of X, Y, and Z. So I'll just kind of dive in. These ones, like this one up on Brook Road, they have some really large chargers on it. Electrify America installs 350 kW chargers at not all, but some sites. And then 150 kW at pretty much all of their sites. They do have a couple things with L2 chargers. These are very fast, as I'm sure, as you guys know, there's nothing on the market right now that can charge at 350 kW. But the other thing about that is it's a lot of power draw. So the first thing when, any company, anybody looks at, it's like, can we provide power? Where's the utility going to bring power to it, and is it even feasible? When there's buildings involved, things are different. So to put it into reference, you may, two 350 kW chargers and two 150 kW chargers, that's a service from the utility that could feed a large building. So now you're taking this very, very large electric service that the utility would typically know exactly how it's going to be used, right? Like, oh, this is going to a Walmart. Oh, this is going to a hospital. This is going to whatever. They can say, hey, we're going to be able to charge X, or we're going to get this amount of money back from them in the next 5 years, because we have a lot of data on that. Electric vehicle isn't quite so much. We're installing these large services with very, very large transformers with no building. It's just kind of sitting there in a parking lot. And the utilities they're companies that need to make money. So the question for them is always, how much money are we going to make off these? Do we have usage data? How many people live in the area even? So there's a lot of marketing on not our end, but or marketing analysis, I should say, market analysis, but companies like Volta and Electrify America and EVgo, they have to look and see where these things make sense financially for themselves, but also maybe for a utility, because if you install it somewhere and the utility is going to be like, oh, it's going to cost us $300,000 to install this electric service to this area, and you can't even prove to me that enough people are going to use it, or we're going to make any money off of it. So that's kind of the first one, which is why you see these installations going in at Target and Walmarts and stuff like that. There is electric service there, and obviously people park there. I know Electrify America focuses a lot on installing a network, and that's been probably somewhat of a challenge for them. I won't speak to specifics for them at all. I'm not involved in that part of it, but getting sites in the middle of nowhere that allow you to travel across the country can be very difficult. Just if the utility isn't going to make money off of it, then you have to pay that service, right? Like I said, $300,000 for a large electrical upgrade. If the utility doesn't make profit off of that, if they don't think that there's enough money that they're going to make off of it, then you're going to have to pay for it. And it's a lot of money for a site that it may take a long time to recoup that. So that's just one of them. Another thing that people do, obviously, and this will get into like kind of the real estate aspect of it. Volta, as I'm sure you guys know, they go in a lot of like Walgreens and stuff like that. a small L2. And a lot of these companies are renting space. So you have to kind of prove to, they're having to prove to somebody else that EV is happening, right? They're having to go to whatever parking lot they're installing in and saying like, hey, this is coming. We need to convince you that it's coming. And then they have to go through all this real estate aspect, all of these land agreements. And then once all that happens, you got to deal with the utility. And then the agreement keeps on going because the utility has to own part of their line, and you have to make sure that the owner can agree to have an easement on the property for the utility line. So there's so much, not even electrical engineering aspect of it that goes in to make sure that these chargers can go in. And I'm sure you guys know a lot of people aren't on board with EV. So there's already a barrier to getting these installed. Because depending on who you talk to at a company, they may say, no, I love my gas guzzler. I don't care about this EV charging. So that's kind of part of it. As for like layouts and stuff, which is something Kimley Horn does, it's interesting. One of the challenges of these sites, and you all know, having talked about so many different vehicles, is where's the port, right? Where do you charge? And that's actually a big challenge engineering wise, not even electrical, just in general layout. I mean, it's really just designing how you're going to park these cars and how these chargers are going to be laid out on site to make sure that, you know, the Nero can charge, the Kona can charge, and the Tesla 3 or whichever model, any of those models. So there's always a game for every site that goes in as to where you place these, and you need to make sure that whatever manufacturer you have, there's multiple manufacturers for these, and all of them just a little bit different, and you got to make sure that every car can park in this spot and that charger can reach your port no matter how you park in it. So that goes into one of the reasons you may not see these in tight spaces, and Walmart's a great place for it, and Target's a great place for it, and malls are a great place for it, is because we have giant parking lots that allow us to lay these out openly in whatever way we see fit, right? So that's always a design constraint there. And interesting enough, as you talk about parking spots, there's so much zoning code and stuff like that you may actually get sites canceled. You may say, hey, it'd be really great to install a site at this, you know, this parking lot here. It's perfect for charging. But we have to install all of this equipment. Like I said, large electrical service, you know, 2000 amp switch gear, all these power units, all these dispensers, and you take up parking spots. There are jurisdictions out there that require, if you take a parking spot, you have to install another parking spot. So even if we're upgrading spots to EV charging, we have to put our transformer and all of our equipment. We might take up 8 spots, and now the jurisdiction saying, hey, you need to replace 8 of these spots, even if there's parking data saying it's never used, right? Like the back of a Lowe's, the back of a Walmart. How often really do those get parked in? But it doesn't matter in a lot of these jurisdictions. Once you take them, you have to replace them. It just adds cost to the project, right? I mean, now you have to find space somewhere on site, and sometimes, you know, it's not practical. There's no room to install 8 other chargers or 8 other parking spots. So all of these things just kind of come together into a process of defining or deciding which sites you go onto. And a lot of this happens with not on Kimley Horn's side, but on the companies like EVgo, Electrify America. They have to identify places that they think that this can get like built in, right? And it's all of these aspects, and going through design, any of these things can come up in the middle of it and just cancel the site. So it's always interesting while I'm driving around and I'm thinking, you know, my drive to work, I'm always like, oh, it'd be great if we had a charger here, right? I'm sure everybody kind of thinks about that on their own. And then I always immediately, you look around, see if there's like electricity by. Is there overhead lines? Is there power? and then I always dive down the rabbit hole of, well, who do we think owns this property? How do you think they feel about EV charging, and what jurisdiction it is in? City of Richmond is actually just notoriously hard to get electrical permits in. So how much money do you waste basically going through the process of getting it in a harder jurisdiction than other jurisdictions? So which is why as we go forward in Richmond area, my bet, just because of all of these constraints, we'll see many more sites in Henrico and Chesterfield than we will in the city of Richmond for numerous reasons, but space, the jurisdictions themselves are easier to deal with. You do have way more big box stores or basically strip malls and stuff like that, where you have a large landowner that you may be able to make agreements with and then install multiple sites. So I think, which is what we see in Virginia and a lot of other places. Northern Virginia has seen a large growth, and we're involved in a number of large charging stations up in Northern Virginia. Of course, it's a larger population, and it's a population that has a lot more electric vehicle owners. But I think down here, that's where we're gonna start seeing them pop up as well. Unfortunately, I don't have any direct knowledge of a new station going on in Richmond. I do think hopefully by the end of the year, we may be involved in a contract that would install a number across the entire state of Virginia, including Richmond. But as of now, I'm unfortunately not designing a site here in Richmond. I do have a number. I think for this closest one that I've done is up in, me personally, not Kimley Horn, obviously the Electrify America one at the Walmart. But Spotsylvania is one that I've done. And I think we'll have possibly one up in Woodbridge at Potomac Mills. Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I guess going back to that Walmart site specifically, those I believe have the 350 kW and the 150 kW chargers. And I really, in my opinion, I think that's the future of well, the immediate future, maybe not the long-term future, but the immediate future of these chargers. We're seeing Volta finally announced a fast charger, DC fast charger, I think 300 kW. And there's rumors of a 500 kW charger coming out at some point, which I have no idea what manufacturer that is. That's just kind of the word on the street from the vendors and stuff that we're talking to. And within the industry, it's always a question, especially engineering. What's better? You know, we're even talking about installing the wireless charging pads along the interstate and stuff like that, where you get small incremental charges as opposed to 500 kW. Personally, I mean, I think it makes sense to take gas stations and basically, if you have a 10-minute charge, that's a 10-minute charge. And that's what we see it moving towards on our end. And speaking of utilities, while it is a challenge for them, there are movements within utilities to really push for EV charging, which makes sense, right? Utility makes money off of selling electricity. This is a large amount of electricity. So you see a lot of utilities, again, this can depend on the person you talk to, the utility, but a lot of utilities have task forces, task groups now that focus on getting EV charging done. So there's even some that have within these programs, they will put more money forward to get an EV charging station in. So it's interesting from their side of the story. There's a money part there, but there's also a marketing, right? As we try to improve our impact on the environment, a lot of the utilities are marketing themselves as companies that are pushing for greener energy. So the EV market can definitely take advantage of this. And I know Dominion has a a group that focuses on green energy, and we coordinate closely with them. So I think that will also, as I'm saying this, I'm realizing Dominion has headquartered here in Richmond, but we haven't seen a big push for it specifically from them here. Who knows though? I mean, every month it changes. Well, I think that's my kind of first stab at tackling these topics. I'm really curious if you all had specific questions, because I think that's where this can get interesting.
Okay, thanks, Tim. That was a good background information. So I know there's a couple of things in the chat, but I guess if anybody wants to sort of jump in too, just unmute yourself and feel free to jump in.
Okay, I have one. This is Joe Baum. I'm actually in Western North Carolina with the Blue Ridge EV Club, and I'm on the state Plug-in North Carolina task force. So we're involved with discussions about the VW mitigation fund, and nothing's happening because of budget in our state. But as I've been watching this Electrify America and VW mitigation fund, there's a couple of aspects. One is Electrify America has its own money. I'm not sure where they got that. They were funded and set up, and they're out there putting in stations independent of states like our plans. So they'll decide to put things in certain locations. And then there's the targeted cities. Some cities are targeted to actually be experimental locations. So for instance, the city of Raleigh in our state, and I was trying to look up if there was any in Virginia, is supposed to be one where they test out not just roadside juice bars, but places like apartment complexes, workplace charging and all that kind of stuff. So I guess my question to you, Tim, is beyond the kind of thing that maybe most of us have experienced with the Walmart EA location, are you doing anything to specifically that you can comment about for non-long distance travel? Am I clear? I don't know.
I don't want to get too far into specifics, only because I do want to bite my tongue just at the risk of upsetting our client and making sure I'm not saying anything I'm not supposed to. But I guess short answer, yes. I don't know specifically of anything within workplace or apartment charging that EA is working on. We are working on a number of projects with them that are not specifically focused on these highway charging sites or these Walmart ones. They're a little bit different, and some of them may apply to you guys, but a lot of them, just within the industry itself, these companies, not just Electrify America, but I mean, they're Volta and EVgo, and the manufacturers of the charging equipment themselves, ABB, Signet, Useric, I believe, is one of them. They will also target other things like fleet conversion vehicles. So those are big engineering projects. They don't really apply too much to you guys, but those are things that these companies are pursuing that you guys won't see all too much. One thing on workplace and apartment complex charging, that's something that, so us as a company, Kimley Horn specifically, we do site civil work for all sorts of apartment complexes, commercial developments here in Richmond. We're working on the West Hampton one out on Patterson Avenue. It has apartments and all that stuff, and that's something that we're personally pushing for. As you build these new buildings, it's never cheaper to install EV infrastructure than the beginning. So I'm not sure what Electrify America is doing on that, but I know we're pushing for it. Oh, we're doing a new parking garage. Well, what are you guys thinking about EV charging? Maybe they don't even install it now. We're pushing for people to just install conduit in panel size, or because really when you think about a building or a parking garage or a parking lot, it's the infrastructure that costs that much money. If you have to come back in later and install 4-inch conduits all over the place to get from here to here to here, it's either going to be one, really expensive, or two, really ugly. And a lot of people don't realize, but clients actually really want their parking garages to look nice and clean. We probably don't notice it all too much. I probably do more than other people, but so it's always a battle on that. But there's definitely a push. Parking garages are a huge push for more of an L2 world, right? These huge chargers are a little bit more difficult to coordinate within tighter spaces like apartment complex parking and stuff like that, because they take up so much space. But L2 charging within your home, apartment, I should say, apartment complexes, and then commercial office parks and stuff like that. Yeah, it's a big push.
Well, I mean, it seems like to me, and I don't know about the RVA, that whenever we talk to, we're getting into a new barrier with a lot of people. They just say, I don't have any place to charge at home. I mean, because most of us charge at home most of the time.
Right.
And so that hurdle has to be jumped with either codes that require this prep work on new construction or something like that. So,
and across the country, we are seeing certain codes require EV charging. Virginia hasn't come yet.
No. As of 1 July, we have. We just got the right to charge bill passed this year, and it will take effect 1 July. So in about a month and a half, yes, we will. And also, I wanted to point out that up here in Northern Virginia, a lot of the modern complexes do put in level 2 charging. And in fact, that is my opinion, the best charging infrastructure for apartments, because you're there for like 8, 10, 12 hours. It's perfect for just plugging in. Even level 1 or level 2 is perfect for an apartment.
I agree. Within parking garages in general, even commercial ones that you're seeing like in downtowns and stuff like that, L2 is the more the regular one, and it does make sense, right? I mean, these charging spots for Electrify America that I work on a lot are meant for long distance, right? Like you need to get from point A to point B, and let's do that. But if you're, even if you're sitting somewhere for 2 hours, you don't really need that. I mean, it's not as big of a deal, and it makes the design so much easier. The installation, the cost, all of it. There could be existing capacity if again, I'm talking about adding it. New construction is a whole different world, but adding it, it's so much easier. There's probably existing capacity for the electric service in the building to add charging to. In Volta, which does almost all L2, or at least their big service right now, they don't get new utility services. They just take off of the existing building. So I agree. It does make sense for workplace and apartment complexes. I think L2 will be the standard for a long time. There's no point charging for 30 minutes.
The 2021 ICC building code update is supposed to include the buildings, all new construction. I believe it's new construction, maybe significant renovation, should include to be charge ready, which is kind of what you're saying, is do the infrastructure up front at a minimum. Yep. Virginia, they're just now this year updating their building codes, but it's based on the 2018 ICC. And Virginia is one of the states that doesn't adopt that per se. They typically adopt it with amendments. And Virginia, unfortunately, my understanding is the amendments that get adopted, dumb it down is not it makes it less stringent, I guess is a better way to put it. So there's an update going on this year, and then the international code that everything's based on in the States is going to get an update that includes the EV readiness, charger readiness.
Hey, Steve, this is Glenn Bessa. I've been talking to some people who are very involved right now in the building code process. Are you following that closely too? Because I want to make sure you're plugged into talking with them so they're aware of the EV aspects. They may already be, but I'm not sure.
No, I'm not following it closely. The interest is because is there any kind of a possibility that as an amendment you can get the EV charger readiness into our code before it gets into the ICC codes. So it's like in the last week, I've kind of talked to some people and somewhat become familiar, but no, I'm not directly involved with it.
So the reason I ask is because, yeah, Virginia, as you noted, basically tends to water down the international code when it comes out. And right now there's an attempt to try and make sure that that code is adopted as is and not watered down. So did you say that the code, that the international code right now does have the EV?
No, it does not. It's going to be introduced in October for the 2021 updates, my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
So what I was wondering, is the text out there already, or you could get some sample of it and say, use that as the basis of an amendment for Virginia code. That's where I was thinking.
Let me pass it along. Thank you.
Well, it's interesting when that comes out. In my experience, the state of Virginia for like National Electric Code and stuff like that is, yeah, if they're working on the update for 2021, it's going to be a little while before, even if they don't water it down, before I think it's probably accepted by the state. But it's interesting you talk about that, because that's something that we can, at least from an engineering and client services side of things, we can always recommend stuff to our clients, right? Hey, Virginia's doing this, but maybe they're a little too slow to act. So referencing what we do that for NEC all the time. The state of Virginia does not have the most recent National Electric Code adopted as code within the state. We designed to it though, right? Because why, unless there's an update that causes extreme cost and your client wants to put off that cost until they're absolutely by law required to, we designed to it. And that's something that we can obviously push to any client, whether it be a parking garage or a parking lot or whatever. Say, hey, next year it's not required now, but what we're moving to is requiring this infrastructure. Why don't we do it for this project? And stuff like that's just becoming more and more, people are listening to it more.
Hey, Tim, this is Aaron. I work in solar for Solar United Neighbors, and it's kind of a follow-up question to your point about infrastructure. So like with solar, I'm pretty good, for better, for worse, at looking at roofs and saying, oh, that's a fit, that won't go. And I'm wondering, for both level 2 and for DC fast charging, like when it comes to commercial structures or anything, do you have any hard and fast rules that, like, when you're looking at a place, driving by a parking lot, like, is it geographic layout? Obviously it's the amperage or the service, but are there any factors that you can basically start asking yourself right off the beginning, just to say, hey, that's a good fit, that won't be a good fit?
Most things are doable. I'll say that. Hard and fast rules, I would say within a parking garage, height might be an issue. There are some really short parking garages out there, and some of this charging equipment isn't that tall or isn't that short. So that could be an automatic non-starter. One thing that always kills something for us is floodplain. If you have a property that's within a floodplain, you're not getting a charger in it. And there's tons that are, right? I mean, there's tons of properties out there that are, it doesn't flood that often, but you're just not going to want to put your equipment there. It's just not going to make sense because it's going to get ruined and it's expensive, and you also have to follow more code, right? I mean, there's all sorts of extra stuff that you have to do. We do put stuff in gas stations, but classified area. So gas stations there's classified area basically being the areas where sparks or arcing could possibly cause explosions. But anywhere, whether it be maybe there's a gas infrastructure area close by or something that could be a non-starter, those classified areas are pretty small in the end. But for the most part, most places work, at least on the surface. When you dive into it, that's really what it takes to really determine whether you can do it cost-wise. It's always about the money, right? I mean, most places you look at it and be like, well, I can't tell right now. It's not a problem until, until you get in design and you get survey and you're like, oh, to get power to it, we're going to have to cross a major, in this that doesn't have to do with the classified area, but a major gas line, like branch or something. And that right there could already maybe kill a site, because the coordination, to maybe it's extra cost, 3, easement or agreement to allow to cross that might be very, very difficult, because nobody wants to risk breaking the main gas line that serves X amount of clients or whatever it could be. So yeah, I guess just glancing, parking garages, height, and maybe age as well, a very old one, structurally. There's a lot of conduit for these big ones. L2s you could probably do in pretty much all parking garages. It shouldn't be too difficult, but very, very large chargers, it's a lot of conduit that you're gonna have to mount to either walls or ceilings, and structural engineers really, really hate giving the okay drilling into old parking garages. So that could be a non-starter as well.
Great, thank you.
Just put in the chat box a link to one article. There's several out there that references the new update.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, I just opened that up. Thanks.
I'm going to toss a quick question in there because it relates up, because I've read in numerous articles that trenching is sort of among the highest ticket items EV project. That seems to be the case from what you're saying. And so what are the other sort of big ticket items in terms of cost in one of these projects?
Length, really just extending. So the equipment is what it is. And I don't want to give exact numbers, but trenching is a problem times the length. A 15-foot trench, whatever, not a problem. And the longer it gets, you're probably going to bore your conduit as opposed to trenching. But one of the things, and again, this speaks to the complexity of each site, that can cause the trenching to be an issue is some utilities require their primary line to be encased in concrete. So we may have a site where they're like, oh, we'll bore this really long run, which is much cheaper because you're not tearing up all this land, and you have to get permits for land disturbance if you do that. So it makes a lot more sense. And then you talk to the utility and they're saying, no, that has to be encase that conduit in concrete. Well, you can't encase a bored conduit in concrete. So there you go. That's just added a ton more costs. And now when you talk about the secondary side of things, so the power feeding from, in these fast chargers anyways, you have a power unit, a cabinet kind of, and that feeds the dispenser itself, unlike an L2 charger. If there's not a way to make that distance reasonably short, that cost is just gonna skyrocket. And that comes from the cost of wire. These wires are huge. A 350 kW charger has, not how much you guys know about wire sizes, but it's a large wire. And copper isn't cheap. So, every 10 feet, you're talking about a lot more, not just installation, but value. And then you also get into voltage drop issues. So the longer it is, the more the voltage drops over it. Basically, you have to make that wire bigger and bigger and bigger. So you really want these sites to be as compact as possible. You want your service there. You want your utility service. You want your main switch gear, where your breakers and stuff are, your power cabinets to be right next to that. And then ideally right outside of that is your chargers, because that just makes everything cheaper. I'd say distance.
I'm just curious, how many zeros in the gauge?
500 kc mil.
Wow.
For the 350 kW chargers.
Mm-hmm.
It's big. It's definitely big.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I got 1 stroke 0 gauge for my my own home EVSE. It's aluminum though, so it needs a bigger gauge. But
yep.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And that's always a factor there as well. Just design wise, copper versus aluminum. There's all sorts of stuff like that. So cost wise, copper costs way more than aluminum, depending on who your client is or who the owner is. you know, people have their own opinions about aluminum, copper. Aluminum's much cheaper. You can go through design, and then you know what, you go put a permit in, and somebody at the jurisdiction says, oh no, our building code section this, blah, 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 says in this case, you're not allowed to use copper, or you're not allowed to use aluminum wires. Now you got to go back and spend a few more grand, and hopefully you haven't ordered the wire. I mean, if you don't have a permit, typically I haven't ordered the wire, but and now you've increased the cost of it there. So there's plenty that you can guess at, but really the added costs outside of the initial diving in, you really never know until it happens. There are certain things, retaining walls are really, really expensive. And we've done a few sites where, I mean, it just causes, you have this perfect site, the HJ is easy, your jurisdiction's easy, the utility's easy, everything else is easy, and then you go into it and you're like, man, we're gonna have to build a 15-foot retaining wall to get this equipment installed. And now whatever maybe you've saved in time and money on every other thing just added a you know, again, don't quote me on any of these numbers, $200,000 wall or something for this site. So I would say that's a pretty big thing. In some companies, maybe that's a non-starter, right? Maybe that's, hey, we're not building a $200,000 wall. And then some companies, maybe that site's important to them, you know?
Hey, Tim, you make a good point about sort of those kinds of things you don't think about when you're installing EV charging infrastructure. And thinking about referencing the Electrify America location at the Walmart, one thing that struck me was how nicely designed it was, because there was a sort of this brick structure like to the left of the line of chargers. And I assume, I didn't go poking around in there, but I assume that's probably where all that stuff you're talking about, like the transformer and the switches and that it was all kind of tucked away in there. You know, that's definitely a consideration, because what's the ways you can put all that stuff close to each other, but then there also has to be aesthetically pleasing too, especially if it's something place open like in a parking lot, and then where potentially somebody can go and mess around with it and vandalize and that sort of thing. So I wanted to go ahead.
I mean, go ahead.
I was going to say, I was going to go ahead and after you answer that question, if anybody else has any questions, I know we have a few folks that had joined when the call came. I saw Vanessa join and Humphrey as well. And Jean is on the line as well. So if any of you guys have any questions, please feel free to jump in as well. So,
hey, this is Glenn. Let me just make a plug for next week's call when actually I'm going to kind of do a introduction to the actual charger there at Walmart, the Electrify America. I've used their chargers quite a bit. And while this has been really fascinating, understanding the engineering behind getting these things in, for most of us, it'll be the practical question of using them. And I've learned a few tricks, and I really like those chargers with a few improvements they could have. But all in all, next week we'll be taking a tour of that facility in terms of as an EV user. So I thought I'd just make that plug.
Real quick, I'm curious, what improvements?
Well, one of the problems that I had that very first time that really I thought, like, what the hell have they done here? And then I saw other people is on a sunny day, you cannot see the screen. Okay. You can't see it. I mean, it really isn't invisible. Now you get around that by using your computer and the app. Okay. That's the way to go, because if it's a sunny day, those screens are invisible. And how do you actually press a touch screen when you can't tell where the buttons are? And I it wasn't just me. I called up and they had first just come in there, and one of the spaces, the one out 64 halfway to Charlottesville, and they were very nice. The bottom line is there's always somebody you can call, and they can actually do it by hand. They actually is somebody there on the phone who can actually make the damn thing work. So that's good. But all in all, I really like them. Sometimes they're a little finicky, but all these high-speed chargers are a little finicky when they don't kick on the first time. You got to unplug them and plug them back in. But that doesn't happen too often. But that's the biggest complaint is the damn screens are impossible to see in the sun.
Yeah, I'm curious, and I can't pull up the drawings for that site, but I'm curious what it is an older site for EA, and I'm curious what manufacturers they use. They have originally had partnerships with multiple manufacturers, and as they've gone forward, they've narrowed down into, I'm sure, what they, again, not speaking for them, but what I'm sure they have as their favorites and stuff. So
You
anyways,
wouldn't happen
thank you.
to know if it was an ABB, would you, Glenn?
I don't know. I mean,
Okay.
they all look the same. So unless there's a new model that I've been using ones along 95, and that one on 64 going out to Charlottesville, and they all look the same. So I haven't really looked for any kind of differences in the models. But when I went online, I noticed that there were a number of other people bitching about the same problem, and fortunately there is a number there, and there's somebody there to help you walk through it. But boy, was it aggravating, because it was the first time, and I was driving my Leaf, and I needed a charge.
Right. Well, I will say that most of the Electrify America ones, they're the big, long, tall pedestal things.
Right.
If it's one of those with the big thing there, it is probably not the ABBs. The ABBs are mainly used by EVgo. So I was just curious there. But I will say this, just to coda on the original comment that I made about level 1 and level 2. Walmart, that restaurants, perfect, bodegas, perfect, because you're not there for long and you want to get that charge fast. So it's perfect because you probably will not fill up by the time you leave, or if you do, you're ready to leave when the filling is done.
The Walmarts are along interstates, close to the interstates,
Exactly.
because I use them to get down to Eastern North Carolina to see my dad. And there's actually one in a Sheetz there, and near my house there's the Wawa that has a big whopping Tesla bank of chargers, when I'm around town, I don't need level 3. I use level 1 at home, and I can use level 2. But when you're on the road, and more of us who have electric cars, if we're going to use them for vacations or trips, we're going to need level 3. And Electrify America has actually got a network too. The other thing I'll just say good about that is if they're working, because you can check it. They're networked. I mean, a lot of times we'll go driving in looking for a level 3, and the damn thing is not working. Or level 2. So having a network system of chargers is really an important element to reliable EV use.
Yeah, Tim, this is Joe again. My kind of question is about a learning organization, and does Electrify America, are they a learning organization? They've been here a couple of years now. They're getting off their feet wet. Like Glenn, though, this comment he made, I've seen this happen at many, many stations where you can't see a certain display, or a curb is out too far and you can't quite get the car where you need to, so you got to park sideways, cross to the layout. We've all been to level 2s where you go into, there's 4 parking spots, or maybe around one level 2, and every single parking spot can get to it. But because of the power distribution on a level 3, you really are limited in how you lay out. So it seems to me, though, after a person puts in a number of these, I'm not saying you, but Electrify America, they would find out best practices, and they would share them with somebody like you, who would say, yeah, owners have given us this feedback and we think the better layout is like this now. Do you get that feel from Electrify America, or any kind of direction that they take feedback from people like us, or they're learning about their deployment?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll admit I'll probably walking somewhat on thin ice on these questions, just given my relationship with them. But
Hey, go for it.
Maybe thin ice isn't the right word. Electrify America, one, they design at every site, and obviously depending on how you design something and how it gets built differs, but we design with them. So we are designing engineers. They give us requirements, stuff like that, to make sure that every car, EV vehicle within reason, can charge at these stations. I would hope that there aren't many that you run into, that many curbs and stuff like that. I know that they think about stuff like that, and I do also know that when we go into design, maybe halfway through, we're into this entire project, and something comes up. Maybe it is that gas line or something. And oh man, we just lost 5 feet for our site. And yeah, instead of canceling the site because it's going to be a little more difficult to have a car park there, they can park there. I do know that I don't believe many sites would go through where a car cannot be parked, but it may be a little bit more difficult. And I guarantee you that came out of some sort of design constraint within the process, whether that be the owner says, no, you can't take up 5 spots. I don't want to lose 5 spots. I can only lose 4. And instead of canceling the site, because that's the number one priority, right? Get these installed. It's better, in the end, it's better to have one that kind of stinks a little bit more to use than to not have it at all. So you may run into that gas line or that owner or the AHJ who says you can't take up 4 spots. So you lose 4 feet in your design, and that 4 feet means that turn into that spot, you might nick that curb a little bit more. So as to your original question, a learning organization, absolutely. They're a well-ran company, engineering company. I don't know if they'd call themselves that, but I mean, they know what their equipment needs and they know what their site needs, and they've built a lot of these sites and they know a lot of things and are able to bring that in from the start of the project now. So absolutely, they definitely learn from the sites, as I think any company that is doing something over and over again would need to. I think you would just be a failure of a company if you if you weren't learning from your own projects.
Hey, Tim, I think you gave a good answer there. I think
was
you're
gonna
in
add to
good,
that, if
you're
I-
in good stead. And I know we're coming to 2:52, so we still have about 8 minutes, but I want to be sure some folks that are on the call and I haven't had an opportunity to ask a question if they have one. So if you have not asked a question thus far, please feel free to jump in for those of you who are on the call and maybe you have a burning question here about electric vehicle charging infrastructure. This is the right guy to ask. So I'll open the floor if anybody else has any questions. Okay.
I got a question.
Okay, looks like, all right, Glenn's got one.
I got a question. I know I want to see if anybody else had one first. By all means, go. First of all, I just want to say one of their CEO, one of their managers had said he actually monitors PlugShare for feedback on Electrify America, which I thought was helpful because PlugShare is a very good place to share insight by users. But this is a question for our speaker, Tim. So Tim, when they have these structures up there, each of them has 2 connectors for your car, but you can only use one at a time, even though there's enough space to park 2 cars. I guess there's some capacity reason with respect to that, because I'm wondering why they have 2 plugs for your car, but you can only use one at a time per stanchion.
So, and I want to point out that there are a lot of sites that were designed, and things change. As I said, they're a learning company. Now, on sites that I'm involved with, for the most part, unless it's a dual port that has both ports on it, it should just be one charger. But I can speak to what I think is going on there. There are, and I'm sure you all probably know this, there are different types of chargers out there. Some will allow you to have 2 spots, and sometimes that's nice just because you can have 2, maybe both of them can't charge at the same time, but at least they can both pull up and maybe one's done charging, still sitting there, and you have availability on the other side. That's a thing. There's also some that will just split the power in half. So I don't, maybe these are probably more like L2 chargers, or some bigger ones, maybe some 40 kW. They'll have something where if one car is charging, you can charge full, and then if another one's charging, you split it in half. But back to your original question, from the sites that I work on, unless there's 2 ports, just for capability of all charging all vehicles, I'm under the impression that there would just be one one charger per one, I guess one plug per dispenser is what we call them, dispensers. So unfortunately, I don't think I have a good answer for you on that one.
Okay, well, there's one question in the chat here that I wanted to pass along was, there's some folks on the line that are from Maryland, and so are you aware of any, what the plans are for, I guess, either Electrify America or other clients for doing any infrastructure build out in Maryland or DC for that matter?
I can say that there will be some chargers going in Maryland. The DC metro area and